Welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We've been here for 6 seasons, now here for the 33rd episode of Season 6. And, of course, we're here to talk about your Missouri basketball Tigers. I am your host, Sam Snelling. With me on this other side here is Matthew Watkins at Data Mizzou on Twitter. Matt, how's it going? How are you?
It's going well. How are you?
Well, a little bit of a disappointing weekend. Personally, I'm doing great. Things are things are really good here. On the Mizzou side, yes, a little bit of a disappointing weekend. I guess the big news of the past week is that really where we sat last week, I think a lot of us were feeling pretty good about Missouri and Matthew Cleveland. As the week wore on, those good vibes seemed to disappear a little bit. And I really want to say by like Thursday or Friday, all good vibes were gone. It seemed like he was locked in on not Mizzou. And so Matthew Cleveland is the newest Miami Hurricane. He's not coming to Columbia. A little disappointing overall. Watkins, what's your take? How you feeling? How do you feel about this?
About Cleveland's commitment in isolation?
Section it off.
Well, it's kind of hard to look at it, I guess, as a one-off deal. The question for me, since Mizzou's roster has been kind of taking shape, is that they've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of, I hesitate to call them role players because players improve. Their roles broaden. They may shrink depending on the player. But you feel pretty good about, 10, 11 spots on the roster. But the final 2 happen to be pretty big ones, as we know, as we're waiting on Kobe Brown's NBA prospects and subsequent decision, and then also, of course, Isaiah Mosley, who I will say things appear to look pretty good for his return. But as we witnessed last year, that even a return doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be on the court. So with that being said, there was something to be said for Mizzou looking for another volume player, another one who is comfortable with the ball in his hands, another guy who's comfortable having to put the team on his shoulders when things aren't going great and getting baskets. Matthew Cleveland was that type of guy. He was very similar in a lot of ways to Caleb Love. And both of those guys are very talented, but both of them have some improvements to make to really get where they want to go. And you think, or at least I did, that Mizzou probably could have coaxed that out of one or both of them, at least to a higher level than they had before. So in that respect, it's a little disappointing. And Cleveland, unlike Love, is a little bit bigger and a little bit better on the defensive glass. So that's always something you're looking for too. But yeah, I would say it was mildly disappointing. But again, it's one of those things that, taken in context, a month from now, it could really hurt, or it could be something that, they gave it a good run, but all in all, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So we're kind of in that holding stage, or the waiting room, so to speak, of how the roster finalizes, and how my feelings are on Cleveland's decision as it pertains to Mizzou will very much be impacted by how those things transpire.
And all respect to, Jesus Carralero, it does sort of feel like there were, 3 pretty significant misses in a row. Although, Caleb, I think, sort of bounced before the run of Caleb Grill and Tamar Bates. So that, like, Mizzou kind of lined up those pretty early. But then these 2 pretty notable, and I would say, like, very public misses. So, the public courtship was there for both Caden Shedrick and for Matthew Cleveland. And so, we've been very upfront in our feeling that missing on Shedrick is a much, much bigger deal than missing on Cleveland. I feel like Cleveland was definitely a guy that would have been nice to have. For one, it's Kobe insurance. At this point, we don't know what Kobe Brown is going to do. Having, even if Isaiah Mosley comes back, having an additional perimeter scorer who you can rely upon to sort of, get you buckets on a nightly basis, is going to be valuable for this team next year, because for all of like the additions that I feel are good, like I feel like they're going to be better defensively, and even they're going to be better rebounding just by the team that they have, even though they don't have like that sort of interior centerpiece. You still look at the roster as kind of missing maybe a bucket getter, and if Kobe Brown, does decide that his college career is over, his NBA career is going to start, then you are really kind of forced to fill a void with with a series of moves, as opposed to just kind of funneling it. I kind of feel like, at least from a scoring standpoint, you could probably get similar scoring from, Matthew Cleveland taking another step forward in his progression as a basketball player, versus, really kind of piecing together a lot of these possessions with guys like, John Tonji, Caleb Grill, Tamar Bates, all guys who, and I'm as high on as anybody on Tamar Bates and sort of what he can become, but still, it's a guy who hasn't produced consistently at the highest level, and so you're basically like, the Shedrick miss is one of those where it's like, man, like this is, if you get him with everybody else, like Kobe comes back, you got Shedrick, Isaiah Mosley, man, like I don't care what Matthew Cleveland does, like I don't care what Caleb Love does, like that's a top 10, 15 level team, but missing on him, I think now you're cobbling together all kinds of different pieces and hoping they work, and that includes Jesus, Carralero, who, by all accounts is a nice looking player and I think fits in what a lot of Dennis Gates wants to do. But he's not a guy who, you're going to count on, 15 points a night from. And, definitely, Cleveland is a guy who probably could have stepped into that role should he have made the decision to join the roster. Alas, he's a Miami Hurricane. So now it's just like, Mizzou is, I think it's still a very good place for their offseason, but it's like, what are they going to do to make sure that these buckets are getting scored consistently the way that they were last year?
Right. It's the way I look at it is that, ideally you want to have a core set of guys that you're building around and building out and filling in roles as needed. Whereas Mizzou this year, at least how I perceive it, and it's probably not their decision, but they've been forced to kind of build the opposite way, where they're filling in roles of guys that can, that are, I don't want to call them specialists, but guys who've proven that they can do certain things well. And then you're waiting on the decisions of your core pieces, which would be obviously Kobe Brown. Anytime you're talking about a potential return of a all-league player, first team, and if he returned, could theoretically be the preseason player of the year. I mean, that's no small shoes to fill. And there's just really no way to dance around it, about how big of a role that he carried last year and would theoretically do again this year.
Well, I think
so until we really know that, I would say that it's undecided on, what the impact of Cleveland's decision will be. Whereas had he decided on Missouri, that even though he's probably not going to give you what Kobe did last year, it's a lot closer than what roster currently is not.
Yeah, and I think like that's probably, the biggest worry, at least for a lot of Mizzou fans at this point, is you know, if Cleveland is there, it's the insurance factor. You definitely feel better. Like Isaiah Mosley, for all of his off season trouble this past year, um, like, is that a guy that you are sure that you can count on? If you can count on him, then I think you can count on production. Like we've seen, even through some of his struggles shooting the ball from the outside last year, that he was still productive when he was on the floor. He made the lineups better when he was on the floor. The defense has to gravitate towards him, and it makes other guys taking shots easier shots. So he's definitely a guy that is going to like impact the play on the floor. It's just a matter of like there's just no knowing that he's going to be there for 30 plus games after the way this last season went. And as long as that's a worry, and as long as those things are a part of the conversation, then it's going to magnify missing out on recruiting Caleb Love, recruiting Matthew Cleveland. Because I think at least with those guys you can get the type of production that you might get maybe a little less on the efficiency side.
Right.
Than what you would get through Mosley. So, it's just one of those things where it's like a little bit of if Mosley comes back and he's there for 30 plus games, if Kobe comes back, this is a non-issue. Like missing on Love, missing and realistically, like even missing on Shedrick because of what those two guys can do to push down the rest of the talent, which has been upgraded. Like, I think you look at the guys who were brought in last year and the record that produced last year. And instead of getting guys from the Horizon League, and guys who were, role players, or, like Nick Honor is really the only high major, role player to hit the roster. And now you have a guy who is almost a 10-point per game scorer at Iowa State. You have a former top 30 level, talent who, can hopefully break out. And so like the level of guys that you're adding and Tanji, and instead of being in the Horizon League, Tanji was doing his damage in the Mountain West, which is a really good conference.
Better than the SEC.
Over the ACC and really step in step with the Pac-12. So you're essentially getting a guy who is doing all that at just below what probably consider the high major level. But certainly productive players at a high level, and guys who are more productive or as productive at a higher level than the guys who were getting last year. So I don't think you can discount that at all. In the conversation as far as like, is this roster better off? Well, yeah, it is. I'm a big believer that that the additions that have been made so far have made Missouri better off. I mean, does it result in more wins or losses? I mean, who knows? Like Missouri was, 2 half-court he's from, possibly being on the downside of a bubble.
Right.
So like so much of what goes into each season, can amount to some luck here and there. But if you upgrade your defense, if you, are more competitive on the glass and you maintain some level of offensive efficiency, it should at least be a wash.
I've got a couple things to add to that, and then we can move on to our next area. One, yes, absolutely agree with you on Mosley. There's, if you guaranteed that he would play 28 minutes a game, every game, there's not 10 guys, excuse me, there's not 10 guys in college basketball I could pick that I would rather have on Mizzou's team than Isaiah Mosley. His skill set is so unique at a position that is so important, and he does it so efficiently. It's, I gushed over him plenty last offseason, and those thoughts still hold true. I mean, he never fully took off this year, but when he came back midway through conference season. It took him a game or two to really hit the flow, but the offense just operated at a different level when he was on the court. And this is an already good offense. And also, of course, defensively, I think was underrated. The team's performance improved defensively when he was around. So, getting him back is obviously a major component. Kobe, same thing. Again, you're not going to find many guys who are more impactful in the transfer portal than Kobe Brown. And what's also additionally important with Kobe is that as it stands right now, there's just not a whole lot of experience depth in the front court. So Kobe Brown not only fills a playmaking role, but he also fills a position of need, and it's probably need capitalized. And finally, on John Tonje, I had just been looking over some numbers, and his performance at Colorado State this year was virtually point for point, point for possession, possession for possession, exactly what Noah Carter did at Northern Iowa. And you won't find a bigger Missouri Valley honk than I am for someone who doesn't have a team in the Missouri Valley, but it's just not the same level of play as the Mountain West. And, Tonje is a 6'5" wing, whereas Carter's a 6'6" combo forward. He doesn't have the positional size limitations that Noah Carter does, who has, to his credit, had a very good year. So, I think using Noah Carter as an example, you can somewhat extrapolate John Tonje's impact offensively to that or better than what Noah Carter did this year, which would be a very big boost to the offense. So, anyway, those are my 3 points.
And I when it comes to Tonje, I always I really feel like a lot of the discussion that centers around Missouri and its roster almost overlooks this guy. And I'm not entirely sure why. It was probably just because he was first on the board. It happened so quickly. The portal was open. He entered, and a couple days later, he was Missouri Tiger. All of that is, I don't know, maybe plays a role in why, when it comes to these offseason additions, everybody's focusing on, what, Caleb Love and Matthew Cleveland are going to do. But, Tonje is a guy who is actually productive and efficient. And it's kind of the same thing with Isaiah Mosley and why we've said on the pod, and I will continue to say, the best addition in this offseason that Missouri could make is, without a doubt, if Kobe Brown returns. If Kobe Brown were to go into the transfer portal, he would kind of going back, if anybody who hasn't read my pour over from Sunday, please do. The reason is because I sort of explore this thing called BPR, which is the Bayesian performance rating from evanmia.com. My goal this offseason actually is to get Evan to come on the pod and talk to us a little bit about how he develops this and sort of what kind of impact. But I think this is something that I've kind of tinkered with on my own. I've never kind of come up with something that I'm happy with. But it really allows you to get an understanding of, floor impact from the guys on the floor. Because it does incorporate, defensive stuff as well. And if you use BPR as sort of your guide and Kobe Brown were to enter the transfer portal, he would immediately become the second best player in the portal. Both guys that have already committed and not, second best overall, according to the BPR. I don't remember off the top of my head. I could probably pull it up real quick. Who was number one? But that's the kind of value that you're going to get if Kobe Brown returns. Is a guy that can't be undersold or understated at this point. It's really, really important for Missouri's future how this goes and what kind of team they can be. I think the team as it exists now, even with Isaiah Mosley, is a competitive NCAA tournament level team. If Kobe comes back, I think that discussion changes, because I think that when you have somebody who is who is that good, he's just going to change the dynamic. And I'm probably the first person to admit, like, I never thought that we would be having this kind of discussion about Kobe Brown. Like the fact that like your program may or may not be able to live without him. But he is that valuable and was that valuable this year. And if he comes back, like, Missouri is probably a team that should be expecting to be like second weekend. Like, I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're looking at a definite top 25 caliber team if you get your two guys back, and we'll address other potential portal additions later. But stopping there, I think that's about the level you're talking about. So.
So Matt and I last week talked about Jesus Carralero. Do you have any Carralero takes?
Well, I will be the first to admit I didn't hear the discussion that you all had. Sure. But I do think he's a good fit for what Mizzou does. I will admit I was caught quite off guard by his commitment. But it took, I don't know, I don't want to put an exact time on it, but under a minute of opening up a few various web pages to see his stat lines and some of his metrics, and then pull up a highlight video. I'm like, yep, this completely makes sense. You're talking about a guy who has a lot of the same attributes as a guy like Kobe Brown, and obviously doing it at Campbell and doing it at a less efficient, lower, I guess slightly lower volume, depending on which season you're looking at, level than Kobe Brown. But his game is similar. But this isn't me saying Jesus is Kobe Brown, but when you look at the same type of player, they're similar in what they do. They can dribble, they can pass, they're 6'8". They will step out and shoot, they'll attack the rim, they'll post up, those sorts of things. But, I think what his role will be the interesting thing. There's Kobe Brown last year, coming into this past year, was a pretty finished product outside of his ability to step out and shoot, which obviously is a game changer in college basketball and the NBA. When you go from I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a mid-20s three-point shooter to a mid-40s three-point shooter, that's a game changer.
And I think career-wise, he was at like 28% before the season.
I mean, it was
a 20-point jump is ridiculous.
Right. It was a major hang up for what he can do, and he was still able to work around that, and in the right system, which this last year what I think would have been, he still would have been very productive, but that took him to another level. So I think perhaps it's a fool's errand to hope, but I think that Dennis Gates finding a guy like that, you might be able to at least imply some improvement out of Jesus over what he had been at Campbell, even though he is moving up quite a bit as far as competition goes. But, the Big South has been a pretty big feeder program to high major teams. I think, 21 Baylor team had 2 transfers from the Big South, if I recall right. There have been some good players that have transferred out of there and had productive careers. So, I think it's really an insurance option for Kobe leaving, and also if Carter is thrust into that role, to have someone that is able to log valuable minutes behind him, such that they don't have the numbers crunch that they had last year at the end of the season when they were effectively playing 6, maybe 7 guys a night, and you couldn't really rebound, and you wanted to play at an up-tempo pace and force turnovers, and that's just really, really hard to do with 6, maybe 7 guys in a given night.
It is.
Anyway, that's my thoughts on Jesus.
Yeah, and I think those are all sort of fair. I don't really get the impression that this is a guy that Mizzou envisions as like their answer in the middle. I think it's a guy who they realize plays or is accustomed to playing in a system very similar to the one that they run. He's a bit of a skilled guy. If they can sort of work and tinker with a couple things and make him a little bit more of a consistent shooter, then you have a really, really like solid addition and sort of like back of the rotation guy. They need forwards. They do. Like they need help and people that can fill in for minutes at the 5, even maybe a few minutes at the 4, depending on what Kobe Brown does. Those are things that are valuable. And I think, Carralero is, I don't think Dennis Gates is going to be asking him to come in and play 28 minutes a night. But yeah, like if you can keep him in like the 8 to 12 minute range and he's going to, give you like 110 to 115, like, offensive rating, like that's valuable. And having reserves that you can sort of, pull in and produce that way. Because I think like getting back to like, my pour over piece is like when you look at the correlation between guys that are running via the portal, and incoming freshmen, like the freshmen, you can get value from freshmen. Not to say that you won't, but you can. It's way more inconsistent and it's way harder to pinpoint who will and won't hit. After the top 30, it falls off a cliff. And again, like there are guys outside the top 30 that are doing great, and were incredibly valuable. Maybe Missouri has one of those guys. Maybe Trent Pierce is one of those guys. Maybe, Jordan Butler is one of those guys. Maybe it's Ant Robinson. Who knows? It seems unlikely, but, going based off the data, we should say it is unlikely. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's unlikely. And so that's kind of the world that you live in. So, if Trent Pierce comes in and he kicks Carralero's butt in practice and he's the better player, then you're going to play him.
Right.
But if he's not, and he's not quite ready, he's not quite strong enough, he doesn't rebound, he does like the defensive assignments are a little amiss, then you have somebody you can plug in right now and get the production from. And I think like, that's basically what it comes down to with a lot of the portal ads that end up being rotational pieces.
Well, and that's something that you also have to think about with Carralero, along with Grill and Tonje, is they're going to be fifth-year seniors. I mean, these guys you're not taking bets on guys that are, well, they're 19, 20, we're going to hope they come around. We're talking about guys that are, almost old enough to rent a car. So, there's something
like they've been able to vote in like multiple like national elections.
So there's something to be said for having that experience because, we looked at a guy like DeAndre Golston last year, and I obviously picked him towards the lower end of the rotation in our preseason pieces. And a large part of the reason why he was thrust up into where he was Mosley's absence. But no matter, he was getting starter level minutes. And I didn't see that coming. I simply didn't. And he did well. He was a very valuable player last year. So there are just going to be times that even with transfers, you're going to be surprised one way or another, So whether that's Carralero, I don't know.
Are you saying we should trust Dennis Gates? Are you at the point? Are you at the point where, like, even if you aren't sure about a move, you're like, I'm going to give the coach the benefit of the doubt. I feel like he's kind of earned it at this point. Like, based upon how this team played with the guys that they had last year, I did not think they would be as good as they were. And they were.
No, I totally agree. And there is something to be said for a coach who's looking for a very precise thing in a player. And if he finds that and lands that, that's, you do trust him trying to associate the fit with what he's going to do. But, there's always going to be guys who perform better than expected and guys who perform worse than expected. And a lot of that's up to the individual player. And, obviously I don't know Jesus. I've never met the man. But maybe he really, things click and he takes off and we're all pleasantly surprised. We never know. That's why we watch the games. If it was everything could be boiled down to data, this would be a boring sport. So, and that's coming from a guy who loves numbers more than just about anyone else. So, there's a lot of human element to this.
There is. Moving on a little bit here, sort of recap some happenings in the portal. If you follow the transfer tracker piece, it is barren these days. We are completely out of point guards, completely out of combo guards, completely out of wings, completely out of combo forwards. All that's left are a couple names on the post list. Today, Jalen Tyson, who did have some, at least contact from Missouri. I don't really believe there was ever any serious courting that happened there, but Jalen Tyson, Texas Tech transfer, committed to Cal. He did choose Cal over Kansas and Arkansas, I believe, was a couple teams on the list. And Auburn, yeah. We could talk about Bruce Pearl. Yeah, like if you were a Mizzou fan and you feel bad about missing out on Matt Cleveland, like Pearl's in some stuff right now. Like Alan Flanagan just transferred. Matthew Cleveland chose Miami over Auburn. They thought they had Tyron Lawrence locked down. Now Lawrence has gotten some crystal ball picks to Georgia, and even our boy Trilly was teasing that he might even go back to Vandy.
He covered his bases there. He mentioned three possibilities, so he's covered on that decision.
It does, but it does seem like Bruce has got some work in front of him. That said, the portal is still open for 3 more days. We did just get a with Marshall's best player. I don't know his name off the top of my head. 20-point score goes into the portal today. We are very likely to hear some other big rumblings over the next few days. So if you are tracking the portal like we are, it's not done. From Missouri's standpoint, though, it does seem like there's just one move left to make. Aside from Kobe Brown, who we're probably waiting until the end of the month. So the withdrawal deadline is May 31st. As long as he's withdrawn from the draft, he can return to school at that point. So that's kind of the date that we're waiting on for Brown. Mosley hasn't really said anything publicly. I guess there could be an announcement at some point, but I get the impression that they're going to let him kind of work through the summer and see how it goes. But the last thing is Missouri still kind of needs a big guy, and Jimmy Bell, West Virginia transfer, is after his former coach kind of stepped in it today. Whoops.
We will not quote him.
No, there will not be any quotes. If you aren't following the news story, Bob Huggins slipped up while live on the radio today, and said something you probably shouldn't say out loud. Yeah, you did say it twice.
He repeated it. It wasn't just twice in conversation. He was sure to repeat exactly what he said again, just in case somebody misunderstood.
In case you didn't hear me, I did say it. I think one of my favorite responses, somebody was tweeting at Dan Wolken, and the guy was just like, "Oh, you've said that word 10,000 times in your life," and I'm like, 10,000? That's a lot. I don't think. So it was a homophobic slur that starts with F. I'll let everyone's imagination run from there. I don't think I've said that word in probably at least 20, 25, maybe 30 years. I just don't have a need for it. I feel like it's possible to remove words from your vocabulary. Like, am I crazy on that? So yeah, I mean, like I think if it slips out like that, it's probably something you've said recently. Anyway,
I did
sure.
recently.
And I also I don't think Huggins should like get fired or anything for this. Like, like if anyone's followed Huggins around, he's not the most sensitive speaker. Like, you should probably be prepared to be offended a little bit. Like, West Virginia knows who their coach is. Anyway, getting back to
Jimmy Bell.
his former player, Jimmy Bell. Jimmy Bell is currently on campus at Mississippi State. And from there, I believe on Wednesday. Yeah, so it's May 8th. We're recording this about 8:30 now. And Jimmy Bell is in Starkville. And then Wednesday, on the 10th, he'll head to Columbia. There are a lot of people who believe that he will make a quick decision once his visit is over, possibly as soon as Friday. And I think we're kind of anticipating that he's going to end up at Mizzou. At least that's what the winds are speaking these days.
Not to get into the whole Iowa, Alabama betting scandal, but if you were to place odds on this, and don't, if you're thinking about it, especially if you play NCAA sports, but yeah, I would say Mizzou is probably the favorite in that pursuit. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and Mississippi State also, like, on like the back of Bell leaving Starkville, have Naheem McLeod, was a Florida State transfer, 7'4" center. Good mobility kind of dude. I'm actually surprised that Mizzou didn't even take a look at him, considering the familiarity there with CY, but not particularly skilled. That said, neither is Jimmy Bell. Bell is a big, robust, 6'10", 6'11" guy. He rebounds well. He doesn't get off the floor all that much. He's not the most skilled guy. He is a guy who hopefully can improve some of his rim finishing, but he's a guy that rebounds the ball well. And for a team that needed rebounding last year, adding somebody who can rebound isn't necessarily a bad thing. How do you see Jimmy Bell fitting into the Missouri situation should he commit this week?
Well, it's interesting. I think the first podcast that I was on after my self-imposed ban during the season for consecutive losses after every time that I did appear, I think we were talking about Eddie Lampkin and his possible fit. I mean, this seems like ages ago at this point, but that was one of, if not the first players that Mizzou reached out to. And for those of you who don't know, Eddie Lampkin was a transfer from TCU that transferred somewhere, and I have no idea where it is. Colorado.
He ended up at Colorado. I think Colorado.
Right. Now that I start talking, it makes sense. But it's kind of weird how we've went around the world from an Eddie Lampkin who was like, well, he's big, he provides rebounding, he can move a little bit, but I'm not really sure that that's what Mizzou's looking for. But, I've been wrong before. And then Mizzou's made their way around through all the other post or center interior players, whatever you want to call them in this system, players, and they've arrived back at another Eddie Lampkin in Jimmy Bell. So it's kind of interesting to me how that's transpired, that, we're at a point where we're talking about a guy who's, not Eddie Lampkin, obviously, but close. He's an interior player. He's not Jesus Carralero. He's not Kobe Brown. He's not Noah Carter. If we're talking about him wanting to, add to his offensive repertoire by moving to Mizzou and, getting out on the perimeter, I think that could be bad. Again, I've been wrong before, but there's nothing that we've seen from his time at SLU or West Virginia that indicates that he's going to be a guy that would have really fit into what Mizzou was doing last year. But on the flip side, he does rebound and he's big, and Mizzou desperately needed someone inside last year who could rebound. So I guess in some ways it makes sense. In other ways, it seems counterintuitive from Dennis Gates' comments about, wanting the right size, which to me meant skilled big men, which Jesus Carralero is, and I just almost called him Eddie Lampkin. Jimmy Bell probably doesn't qualify under that definition at this point, at least in my opinion. He's skilled, but not in the way that Mizzou has used their big man in the last 8 to 10 months. So, we'll see what happens there. But, there's always going to be value in having a guy like that, even if you're going through conference season. And, I think Tolu Smith is back for his 14th year in college basketball. If I may be wrong on that, pretty sure I'm right on the years.
Yeah, he's been around for a while. Believe it or not, he started at Western Kentucky, and I believe he transferred when you still had to sit out.
Yeah,
so he sat out, I believe. So we're joking on it, but he's Nick honoring it at least.
right.
Having to sit out as a transfer and playing an extra year. So,
So the quote was with that is that, if you run into a guy like that in conference season and you're drug into a low 60s possession game, which happens every time Mizzou goes to Starkville, and it's usually not going well, if you need someone to go in there and match up with him, Jimmy Bell can do that. But to me, Mizzou's strength last year was the ability to make teams match up to them, and I don't know if Jimmy Bell really fits in with making teams match up to them and having an advantage offensively at every position. But, again, it's May 8th, and there's 5 months until the season even begins to start with the with practice. So, I don't know. We'll see. But I would expect, Jimmy Bell will probably be a Mizzou Tiger by the end of the week. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because the Gates comments are something that we did sort of play up, and we made a big deal out of it because it really kind of spoke to their recruiting philosophy. And it does feel a little bit like they're abandoning that philosophy a little bit because they missed on Caden Shedrick. I think in an ideal world, a guy like Shedrick is what they want in the middle, who can protect the rim, who's athletic, who can move. Shedrick's not a guy who's going to take a lot of threes, but he could shoot a little bit. The problem, though, is that they went really far down the road with Shedrick, where he was the primary guy. And then once you pivot out of that, then what's left? And, unless you're back channeling with somebody who, is as good as Caden Shedrick, I'm thinking of, a certain center that, plays up in Omaha.
Could that be?
If you're finding out like a guy like that is going to be in the portal, then absolutely, if you can make it a priority to land a guy like that, then you do that. But if you've done all the discussions and you've had all the moves sort of play out, and you're sitting here, and it is May 8th, the portal closes in 3 days, and I like that the portal closes on Thursday, which means nobody can enter at that point. And then, Bell is talking about committing on, possibly as early as Friday, which would be the end of his Missouri visit. So at least you have an idea of what else may be out there. It would be nice if you could get in the picture for a guy like, Grant Nelson, if he decides to come back to college. But again, now you're delaying decisions to the end of the end of the month, and possibly going in and competing with, teams that have a whole lot more NIL money to play with, and I'm taking like Arkansas for one is a program unafraid to throw NIL money around, and you're kind of walking up against that. I think at this point it seems like Dennis Gates and his staff are comfortable with the bones of their roster, and if they're taking Bell, they're basically saying, like, this is the group that we think we can win a step further than we did this past year. They'll be deeper. They'll have just as good of some offensive weapons. They'll have probably more upside. And the one thing that they really kind of needed help with was just somebody who could get a rebound when they needed one. And like if that's what it is, then I get it. Again, like I don't know that he helps you a lot offensively, and I think like that's sort of the the tough thing is figuring out sort of like what he's going to do other than rebound, because
Right.
if you have 5 guys on the floor, like they all have to do something. I don't think he's going to.
And I don't want to be considered as speaking bad at Jimmy Bell by any means. He started on a team that went to the NCAA tournament this year. I mean, he's a good player. It's just when you look at what Mizzou did, what type of big guys they were after, the coaching staff's comments, and who they pursued this spring in the portal and who they've been pursuing, in the prep route, it seems kind of like a round peg and a square peg and a round hole.
That's on.
He's a good player, but
The round peg in a square hole will still kind of go in the hole.
yeah. So how will he fit at Mizzou? And I think that's my biggest question. So anyway, but one point of clarification, both of us know this, but the portal closes on Thursday, but that doesn't necessarily mean that players have to sign or decide where they're going on Thursday. It's just that
Correct.
Players looking for their free transfer, non-grad transfer, freebie year have to enter.
And grad transfers can enter at any time.
Right.
Like if you're graduating, you can enter the transfer portal anytime. So it closes the door on underclassmen transferring. The window is closing. I think that's all we had to talk about. Is there anything else that we wanted to hit on before we get out of here?
Not particularly. It was kind of a slow week. Otherwise, we had the Cleveland announcement and the news about Jimmy Bell. So no,
this week could be very noisy, but probably won't be super noisy for Missouri. Like I said, we do sort of think that you'll hear something on Jimmy Bell soon, and it probably is going to be Missouri. And so, yeah, me and the other Matt will probably come back next week and talk about, Jimmy Bell committing or not.
I do.
I'd be surprised.
In Matt Harris's absence, I guess I should feel compelled to mention Mizzou did apparently kick the tires on a Kansas transfer.
Oh, yeah. I did actually have that in my notes.
So
To be a Gia4.
A Gia4. Okay, I was gonna say I'm not gonna try that for the first time on air. But he's a pretty highly recruited high school player that got scant minutes behind Kansas, Jalen Wilson, and their small ball lineups this year. And upon them landing Hunter Dickinson, obviously opted for greener pastures where you could potentially get on the floor earlier. So that's something worth monitoring. I'm not going to comment yay or nay on that. I don't know enough about him.
I did mention it seems like he's already got a visit scheduled to Villanova. I would imagine, Villanova will probably want to close that pretty quick, considering they were in on Hunter Dickinson and they need some interior size. So that would probably make a lot of sense. Anybody who was missing out on Hunter that was in deep on Hunter, I think Kentucky's talking about bringing back Oscar for another year.
I like how it's their decision, like how it's framed as like, oh yeah, I think we'll bring back
Former National Player of the Year.
like we've thought about this for quite a while, and it's our decision that we're going to renew your contract for another year, as if they're doing him some sort of favor. But
yeah, I didn't always think it was funny. As it's like he's exploring his draft potential, and it's like I don't know what NBA like you watch, but brother, like they are not looking for Oscar Tshiebwe in the NBA right now. But yeah, so we'll wrap this up. If you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast or this video channel. It helps us. It helps boost these videos and get seen. It is always good. Feel free to comment and rate and like. I think there's a little like button you can hit down there too. Make sure that you're also subscribed to the podcast feed through Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store, however you get your podcasts. We're also on Spotify. If you're subscribed to all that, then you also get Nate and BK's Before the Box Score. Those guys just recorded an episode last week. I still haven't watched it yet. I need to watch it. What's going on with Mizzou football? If you ask me, who knows? Those guys know, though. They do. So follow this guy on Twitter at Data Mizzou. You can follow me at Sam T. Snelling. We're always into talking Mizzou basketball. Head over to the flagship rocketnation.com and click my all the articles. You can read my last piece on the BPR stuff, how the transfer portal has overtaken high school recruiting and the impact of high school recruiting. Thought it was an interesting discussion, a lot of good comments, so go check that out. And we'll be back next week. And until then, thank you for tuning in. Bye.